So welcome, everyone. This is the first NRAS Research Dialogue, so please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. We're very excited to have you all, and special thanks to Dr. Pooja Prasad for agreeing to make this first dialogue a special one. This is hopefully the first in a regular series that will happen monthly. So before we begin, let me first introduce the NRAS and the series of dialogues, which is envisioned as a monthly series. So the NRAS, the Network of Rural and Agrarian Studies, is an informal group of nearly 400 scholars, activists, practitioners, and farmers interested in rural and agrarian issues in India. And the NRAS has a focus on going beyond discourses of productivity and populism to center issues of social and ecological justice. The NRAS was established in 2010, and we're quite interested in promoting scholarly engagement with a range of pressing issues and ideas related to rural and agrarian India. One of our core focuses is on enabling the scholarship on rural and agrarian issues through mentorship of young scholars. This series of dialogues furthers these objectives. We intend to create a forum where exciting research can be discussed in a collegial manner, and we also want to discuss ongoing works of early career scholars, especially those writing their first papers or dissertation. So if you're interested, please feel free to submit an abstract. The link to the Google form will be shared in the chat box and also mentioned on the poster that we circulated for this event. Today, we're excited to host Dr. Pooja Prasad. She's a professor at the School of Public Policy at IIT Delhi. Her research focuses on land and water management for livelihood security and resource sustainability, with particular attention to semi-arid regions of India and sub-Saharan Africa. She holds a PhD from Sitara IIT Mumbai and was a postdoctoral researcher at IIT Delft. So today, Dr. Prasad, who has been a longtime friend and contributor to the NRAS, will be talking about her recently published paper on climate resilience project in Maharashtra. So without further ado, I would like to invite Pooja to present, and we will set a timer for 30 minutes as we discussed.
Thanks. Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you also to NRAS for this opportunity. I'm going to share my screen. I hope that the screen is visible.
Yes, perfect.
And, great. So since it's a dialogue, I really hope that we can make this interactive. And if there are questions during the talk as well, please feel free to raise your hand using the icons at the bottom. And I think either Carolyn or Nikhit, one of them, would draw my attention to it. But okay, so since Carolyn has already started the timer, maybe I should just dive right in. My talk is titled after the paper, which is Enhancing Resilience or Exacerbating Inequity, Irrigation Investments for Climate Resilient Agriculture. This is work done based on fieldwork that I did during my PhD back in 2018, but it's really more recently that I felt the urgency to connect this with the larger trends that I see happening in agricultural water management, and that was the driver for this paper. Okay, so okay, my slides are not moving. Yeah, I hope you can see the change in slide. So as most of you would know, more than half of India's net sown area is rain-fed. And this is significant not only because of the large human and livestock population that it hosts, that it supports, but also because of its contribution to food security. So variety of millets, pulses, oil seeds, cotton, etc. is grown in the rain-fed areas. And as you would see in this map, the orange districts shown here are the rain-fed, are the districts which are primarily rain-fed. And you see predominantly in the peninsula India, this is where the semi-arid dryland rain-fed regions are. What some people may find surprising is that rain-fed agriculture is also practiced very much in the high rainfall regions, which you see in the western parts and in the northeast and eastern states due to lack of irrigation. So while we may understand rain-fed agriculture as one where crops have high dependence on monsoon and residual soil moisture, it is not, our assumption often is also that rain-fed agriculture implies that there is no irrigation or there's no need for irrigation, and which is not the case. In fact, there is irrigation holds a lot of importance in rain-fed regions, and some irrigation is common in rain-fed areas because villages have local surface water sources such as ponds and other surface water sources, and also groundwater, which supports irrigation. Now, especially in the peninsula India, which has hard rock aquifers, which have very low groundwater yields, this means there is very unequal access to groundwater. And what we typically find in these regions is that there are some pockets close to the low-lying regions, closer to the streams, where it's possible to access groundwater, and farmers practice irrigated farming, seasonally irrigated farming, while the upland regions tend to be rain-fed and don't easily have access to water. And these crops, these areas which don't have access to irrigation, they actually are highly vulnerable to variability in monsoon rains, and require protective irrigation when there is long dry spell during the monsoons. And we find that in various communities, how people have tried to access this protective irrigation, which is basically 1 or 2 irrigation for the crops, which tends to be life-saving for the crops. So essentially, irrigation investment is important, even in rain-fed regions. And what type of investment to prioritize, whether it is investments for the farmers who already have access to water in these water-rich pockets, or whether it is protective irrigation for the rain-fed, or both, or this is an important policy question, especially given the limited nature of water that's available. And this is really the focus of my paper. So let's look at some of the state interventions that have happened in rain-fed regions. And historically, rain-fed areas have seen low public investment. In fact, a paper by Professor Srijit Mishra et al., they estimate that it's only about 1% of agricultural subsidies that rain-fed areas have received in the first decade and a half of 2000 compared to the intensive agricultural regions. So the primary channel through which interventions are made in rain-fed regions historically have been the integrated water management or watershed management program, which is a program through which soil and water conservation activities are conducted within watersheds, which means activities to arrest soil erosion and try to harvest more water through interventions such as check dams, ponds, trenches, bunds, etc., which would enhance groundwater recharge. The integrated watershed management programs typically work at the watershed scale, at the landscape level, and it does not target specific beneficiaries. It's not even meant specifically for farmers, and has in general been historically a way to address problems of rural development. And there's a large body of literature on IWM. I won't go into it, including the successes and the problems, especially related to the inequity in who gets the benefits of IWM. Integrated watershed management had been the flagship approach for dryland regions from the 1990s to early 2014-15. But since then, there has been a consistent fall in the budgets and targets for IWM. Just to give you an idea, about 39 million hectares was covered under IWM between 2009 and 14. And in the last 5 years, only less than 5 million hectares was the target for IWM. So what we see is a policy shift away from this watershed-based natural resources management to investments at the farm level, and which are demand-driven interventions. And so the investments are happening not so much on the public land or the commons land, but more on private farmland and subsidizing private assets with the goal of increasing efficiency and productivity, which have become the driving factors. This has also been the case in Maharashtra. Maharashtra, again, some must find it surprisingly, almost 84% of the land is rain-fed, and it has been a pioneer in IWM initiatives. Between 2012 and 15, Maharashtra faced consecutive drought years, and this triggered in 2015 the start of the flagship program of Jal Shivar Abhiyan, making Maharashtra drought-free was the goal, and then the Mange Tyala Shetare farm ponds on demand program. It was in this context that in 2017, when the project on climate resilient agriculture was initiated in Maharashtra, it was a World Bank funded project, which focused on the 15 most vulnerable districts, primarily in Marathwada and Vidarbha, to address climate variability. And the program pretty much had a similar portfolio of interventions that were being done previously. But one of the key differences is that PoCRA explicitly rejected the watershed approach. In fact, post facto, when you look at how PoCRA spent its budget, you find only 2% of its budget has been spent on works within the landscape, like within the catchment in the public lands and the commons lands, and rest has been on individual assets. So looking at briefly climate resilience and what that is, according to IPCC, it's the capacity of a system to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from climate shocks. The concept of resilience is originally attributed to Holling, and it originates from systems theory, from ecological, in the context of ecological systems and social ecological systems, where feedback and interconnections matter, so that when there's a shock, and one thing breaks, it doesn't unravel the whole system, and there are feedbacks and interconnections which create a safety net. That's sort of broadly the idea of resilience. And in our context of agricultural water management, we are primarily looking at the shock being the monsoon variability, whether it's a monsoon dry spell or a drought year or extreme events. And there are different but interconnected implications for different kinds of farmers, those who practice rainfed agriculture or have some access to irrigation. And so broadly, the main objective behind this paper is to understand how do interventions under PoCRA address resilience given this reality. Okay, so with this kind of long introduction, let me go into introducing PoCRA. This was the first state-led climate resilience project taken up in the country. And the rationale, if you look at all the World Bank concept notes or the PoCRA notes, it starts by saying that the main rationale is that Maharashtra is 84% rain-fed, and farmers have small unirrigated land holdings, and they are especially vulnerable to monsoon variability. And so there's a need to reduce farmer distress and increase sustainability and profitability. And so the overall project development objective for PoCRA is to enhance climate resilience and profitability of smallholding farmers. As you see in this map, this was done in 15 districts, and the overall budget was $600 million US. If you go through the documents, you don't really see any definition of how they conceptualize resilience. This figure from the concept note is what comes closest to to the idea of resilience in the project. And what you see on the left is where they're asking, okay, what do we want our agricultural systems to be resilient to? And this is essentially talking about variability in rainfalls and dry spells and so on. And at the center is what PoCRA refers to as their triple win strategy. So how do they intend or to operationalize climate resilient farming systems? And they basically have three components. One is water security, then improved seeds and soil health. But as you drill down in terms of what are the specific interventions, and then later, if you look at where the budget is spent, it starts to give a clearer picture. So in terms of water security, micro irrigation systems and water harvesting are the interventions. For improved seeds, they actually promote crop diversification, which is essentially horticulture and horticulture crops. Improved improved seeds, drought, salt, or heat tolerant seeds. And for soil health, they promote carbon sequestration, which again is through promotion of horticulture crops. And they promote some good agricultural practices done through farmer field schools and demo plots. And there is an emphasis on markets and value chain through the involvement of the private sector, and they involve a bunch of research and extension and knowledge institutions. And finally, if you look at how are they, what are the outcomes or overarching goals, you see that they call for a more climate resilient agricultural sector, again, not defining what that is. And there are a bunch of indicators around agricultural productivity, income security. And the last three here talk about the GHG emission reductions. Which is an important contributor on how they measure resilience, is how much greenhouse gas emission is reduced, which is something that they estimate using an FAO model. And the key indicators that are measured in the project are farm level water productivity, yield stability, and as I said, GHG emission reduction and net income. So I think I already mentioned how they operationalize the resilience aspects, what kind of interventions they promote. The way this is done is that within the targeted village clusters, there are micro-planning exercise that's done. A micro-planning team goes in, and this is done over 4 to 7 days. A water budget tool is utilized, and at the end of it, a detailed project report is put together on what are the interventions that are going to be made. This is passed through the Gram Sabha and is vetted technically and so on. Over time, though, the implementation itself is done by the VCRMC, the Village Climate Resilience Management Committee, which is constituted during the micro-planning week. And it is this committee which actually finally decides who would be the specific beneficiaries of, of these interventions. And while there is prioritization of farmers from marginalized communities, there is no preference or there's no prioritization of rain-fed farmers versus irrigated farmers. Okay, so now let's move on to the study area, Paradgaon village, where on which this paper is based. This is a village in Jalna district, Marathwada, a large village, about 3,000 hectares. And primarily rain-fed, as you see, cotton and tur are the main rain-fed crops here. So the micro-planning and DPR preparation was done by PoCRA in 2018. This was a phase 1 village. And when I was doing my PhD at IIT Bombay was actually a knowledge partner for PoCRA, developing in helping develop the water budget tool, which was used in PoCRA. And as part of my PhD, I was involved in this. And it was as part of that initiative that I conducted my fieldwork during July 2018. So what I want to answer now for this village, based on the micro-planning that was done, is how is the PoCRA intervention going to reshape access to water? So I first want to understand, pre-PoCRA, what is the current water availability and where is it used? by what type of crops. And I do that both for drought years and good rainfall year, especially because we are talking about rainfall monsoon variability. And then I want to compare that with how would the scenario change post PoCRA, because PoCRA plans to bring in more rainwater harvesting, more of the so more water storage structures, as well as promoting different kinds of crops. So taking these into consideration, how would now the access to water change? And then what are the implications for climate resilience? So I use a mixed method approach, primarily based on modeling, but also it is fieldwork informed in terms of farmer practices. So I won't go into too much detail. I can take questions towards the end, but essentially, if you see here, these are two branches comparing baseline scenario and PoCRA scenario, where there are 4 steps where using the water budget tool, I try to estimate what would be the available water in the groundwater and surface water in a good rainfall year and a bad rainfall year. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention here, like a good rainfall here would be 1,009 millimeters, and a bad rainfall here would be 429 millimeters. So that's those are the 2 years rainfall data that I'm working with. And then I say, okay, so this is the amount of water available in these years. What would be the crop irrigation demand, considering that now there are different crops proposed in the PoCRA scenario? And comparing water availability and crop requirement, then I say, okay, if there isn't enough water, then who gets? How does that water get allocated? And then I finally propose 2 indices to compare resilience across these. Okay, so how farmers actually allocate water when there is water scarcity is something that is inferred through fieldwork, and that is what I want to walk you through next. So essentially, if you look at a typical village, and especially here in the case of Parargaon, you can classify crops or cropping systems into these 3 sort of categories. And I've tried to do that from completely rain-fed, so no irrigation, to the other extreme, which is assured irrigation. So the first row here is the crops which are completely rain-fed. These are farmers who have no access to irrigation, and they would typically grow in Kharif, bajra, moong, or soybean. And typically they grow long Kharif crops, so long duration crops like tur or cotton. And in Rabi, based on how much soil moisture there is in the soil, they may grow fodder or jowar or green gram. The next category is of farmers who may have access to irrigation, but it is only seasonal irrigation. So, they may have wells or bore wells, which could, in good years, help them irrigate a Rabi crop. And so they have intent, so they choose their crops in a way where they assume that they are going to irrigate. So in this case, they would typically grow soybean or vegetables in Kharif, or in Rabi, they would grow vegetables or wheat or onion. But if it turns out to be a bad rainfall year, and then they estimate they're not going to have water in their well, they may reduce the area under Rabi. And finally, you have some small area under annual irrigated orchards, either orchards or long duration crops such as sugarcane or pomegranate, citrus, guava, etc. So if you look at how they adapt to different to changing monsoons, we see that the rain-fed farmers typically are, they have a similar cropping pattern, that they would grow these, cotton, tur, they would be intercropped sometimes. And in case of good rainfall year, if they see more soil moisture, they may grow a Rabi crop. The seasonally irrigated F2 farmers, they, as I said, would typically intend to sow Rabi crop. But when there is a dry spell, or there is they fall short of irrigation, they may then decide not to meet full crop water need, and they may abandon say their green gram or so on, and prioritize the high value crops. So if they're growing vegetables, they will irrigate just vegetables and they won't give water to the other crops. And finally, where farmers have orchards, this is a very high value investment for them because orchards tend to run for multiple years, and the first 3 or 4 years they have actually no harvest. So they're really logged into ensuring that their orchards are irrigated. So if they have other crops, they would sacrifice those crops, but ensure that the orchards are always irrigated, even if it means buying tanker water for them. So this gives an idea of kind of this hierarchy in terms of irrigation allocation when water is limited. And if you look at the case of Paradgaon, you see that of the entire cultivable land, almost 2,000 hectares is completely rain-fed. And then you have about 600 hectares, about 600 hectares or so, which is seasonally irrigated or adaptively irrigated. And then 42 hectares, a small fraction, which has orchards. Now, then I move on to describing the indices that I use to compare resilience. So what does resilience mean in this case, right? Given what we see about how different farmers have different kind of ability to irrigate, essentially, so I described two indices. One is the irrigation risk index, which let me use this to explain that. What this is saying is that the first row, these 2,300 hectares, farmers have no intent to irrigate, they have no access to irrigation. But the other crops require irrigation. And if we look at the total irrigation water requirement of these crops and compare it to the amount of water available for irrigation in that year, that gives us an idea of resilience, right? So essentially, if your crop water requirement is far more, your irrigation requirement is far more than what you have, then you are not resilient, right? If you have because you are going to have yield losses. The way to be resilient is to ensure that you have a buffer, that you are actually utilizing, you're committed to using much less or relatively less compared to what you have. So that is the irrigation risk index, where we are saying, okay, let's look at all the irrigated crops and what is their irrigation water requirement, and what is that as a fraction of the total water that is available in that area for irrigation. And so if it is more than one, then it's completely unsustainable and definitely not resilient. And the lower it is, the more resilient you are. The next index is what I call the irrigation lock-in index. And that is focused only on the multi-year crops, which is essentially saying that the irrigation requirement of these 42 hectares of orchard, this is what the farmers are logged into. No matter whether you have a good year or a bad rainfall year, for the next 15 years, these farmers are going to ensure that this quantum of water goes to these crops. So it really reduces their adaptive capacity in some way, because this water is spoken for. And so we want to keep track of how much are they logged in. So this is the irrigation requirement of these multi-year crops as a fraction of total water available. So the higher this is, the more logged in the farmers already are, and the less room they have to maneuver when there is a bad rainfall.
May I ask one thing?
Yes.
These circled areas are more the area. These are not indices, right? This circle,
No,
the
no,
numbers
no.
inside the circle.
No,
they
no,
are
no.
some area under that, nothing to do with indices.
Correct. This is just to say exactly the indices will come. I'm just trying to show what is the which crop I'm talking about. So yeah, I'm sorry if it's misleading. 42 is not the index. It is showing that I'm talking about the crop water requirement of these 42 hectares. I hope that's clear.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, and also you have 6 minutes left, just to update you.
Okay. All right. So the proposed PoCRA interventions in Paradgaon. So now this is what the DPR says, that they are going to increase water requirement by water storage by 374,000 cubic meter. And they proposed increase in, so if you look at what is the kind of cropping pattern that they propose, and essentially you see that they propose a doubling of irrigated orchards and some increase in the seasonally irrigated crops. So overall, while they are increasing the water storage, they're also promoting intensification of agriculture, and there's an increase in the irrigated area as well as the irrigation water need. So it's now just looking at the water budget results based on the approach mentioned before. Here I'm comparing on the left side the drought year, and on the right side is a good rainfall year, and a comparison between the baseline situation and the PoCRA situation, the planned situation. The blue bars show how much is the water available in the system, and the orangish bars show what is the demand. And the first thing that strikes you immediately, that in all cases, the demand far outstrips the available supply. So the water budget is negative in all scenarios, whether it's current state or its future state. The PoCRA scenario looks slightly better. You have more water availability and less in terms of water requirement, as you can see from here. But regardless, you see that the available amount of water is not sufficient for the crops. So now let's see how is this water then available water distributed, and this is where the indices actually also come in. So what we see is that I'm looking at the baseline scenario, pre-PoCRA scenario for a drought year. That because the orchards are prioritized no matter what. Here you see that the green bars add up to the total amount of water that's available, and then the green bars are what is the requirement. And what you see is that more than half of the water that's available is actually going to be used to irrigate orchards. And of course, a large amount of water requirement of the rainfed kharif crop is not going to be met. So even though the annual orchards make up only 1.5% of the cultivated area, it uses 53% of the available water, and that's the lock-in index. In a drought year, more than half of the water is already spoken for. And the risk index here shows that the overall irrigation water requirement is 1.7 times the available water. What happens in the plant scenario, in the PoCRA plant scenario? What you see is because the area under orchards is increased, even though more water is harvested now, the actual lock-in increases far more. Now you have 3% of area under orchards, which locks in 64% of the available water. The risk index reduces, but still is more than 1. So now the irrigation water requirement is 1.53 times what is available, but it is still definitely not resilient because it's, and you see that's even in good rainfall years. So now if you look at the bottom two, in both cases, the risk index is more than 1, which means even in a very good rainfall year with 1,000 millimeters, we have the case where the irrigation crop water requirement is much more than what is available. So what does this mean? So water availability would be enhanced from the proposed interventions in PoCRA. However, because the program is also prioritizing high-value water-intensive orchards, this further concentrates water use in a very small area relative to the rest of the village. And as a result, what happens is that your opportunity to provide protective irrigation to rain-fed farmers who are most vulnerable to monsoon variability is lost. Secondly, you are unable to create a buffer, and therefore farmers who don't have assured irrigation, they continue to face irrigation uncertainty, because if your irrigation water requirement then continues to outstrip what is available, there will be competition, and there will be farmers who won't be able to fully irrigate their crops and fail and have crop failures. And finally, even those orchard farmers, it doesn't even lead to resilience for those farmers, because now they are locked into orchard irrigation. And given the high variability in rainfall that these regions see, in poor rainfall years, they are not able to adapt. Because they're locked in. So it reduces their adaptive capacity. So overall, what I conclude is that there isn't not only is there a reduction in resilience for everybody, there's actually an increased inequity in access because of the greater concentration of water for the water-intensive orchards. The project, however, makes a claim to resilience by accounting for the carbon sequestered through horticulture and agroforestry. So, and similarly, crop diversification which PoCRA says that it is incentivizing, is a misleading term, because while we think that horticulture in general, having fruit trees and so on, would lead to more resilience, it's misleading because it is referring to a practice of monocropping fruit trees, which is highly input intensive and depends on market vagaries and so on. So it is actually a very misleading term. Okay, just I know I'm running. I just have a couple of slides left to wrap this up. So post-facto reflections. Now, PoCRA phase 1 has ended, and so we have the opportunity to go back and look at how was the money actually spent. And what we find is that even though PoCRA started with the motivation of addressing the needs of rainfed farmers, rainfed farmers have not been the focus. In fact, what you find is that 4 interventions account for 82% of the expenditures made in PoCRA. These are drip irrigation, shade nets for horticulture, sprinklers, and horticulture trees. So in fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration if you renamed PoCRA as a program for micro irrigation and horticulture, because really 82% of investments are doing just that. And only 8% of expenditure has been on individual assets that could benefit rainfed farmers. Interventions such as farm ponds, wells, pumps, promotion of practices such as broad-based furrow, etc. We find only 8% of PoCRA expenditure on it. The thing is that this trend is not just seen in PoCRA, but beyond PoCRA. Even if you look at PM-KSY2, the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, and so on, there is this triad technological fix of farm pond, micro irrigation, and horticulture has become this sort of winning combination, which seemingly helps to achieve conflicting goals. So harvesting rainwater to increase water availability. So farm ponds do that, right? So you are addressing the problem of water scarcity there. Achieving agricultural intensification and high incomes, the goal of having farmers high incomes, horticulture achieves that. And micro irrigation now has become this elegant solution, which suggests that if you have micro irrigation, it will save water and somehow create new water that can support this intensification. What is missed is that when you shift to horticulture, the crop water requirement increases so much that you finally end up staying negative, right? And now increasingly resilience by accounting for carbon sequestered, horticulture is also now considered something that enhances resilience. Meanwhile, basic support for the rainfed farmer is compromised, right? So in fact, if we see the 53 or 64% of water concentrated in those 50 hectares or so, if they could be used for protective irrigation, it would cover a far larger area, a more expansive area for many more farmers, rainfed farmers. And in fact, it's known, theoretically, it's known that deficit irrigation has far higher water productivity than giving full irrigation to irrigated crops. So to conclude, promotion of orchards in drought-prone regions, it cannot improve resilience even when combined with micro irrigation, purely because of the lock-in that it creates and the fact that it requires irrigation round the year. And it's an area which has very limited water availability for irrigation. And so to improve adaptive capacity to monsoon variability, what we need to do is to prioritize protective irrigation access for rain-fed crops, ensuring that happens before promoting irrigation for high-value crops, also in an adaptive way, so that one can step back the irrigation requirement in bad rainfall years and intensify only in good rainfall years based on a seasonal water budget sort of approach. And there are various examples. I mean, I think if you look at the grounded civil society experiments or programs that have been running, whether you look at Vasan's borewell pooling program or like eco farm ponds or farm ponds for rainfed farmers, and or villages which have implemented collective regulation on irrigation. There are many such examples that I think we need to study more, and we need to try and see how these can be brought in the mainstream, especially through these government programs. So I'm going to end at that, and I hope that that we can have a rich discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was a fascinating talk. So I'm glad that, I mean, we heard a little bit about your research earlier, I think, at the conference, but it's good to have this in a webinar and share it with a larger audience. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, but before we get into that, I just wanted to mention that Nikit is going to be sharing a sign-up link in the chat box for those who want to be part of the NRAS listserv. So that will help you stay updated with NRAS events, and also to have the opportunity to contribute to the ongoing discussions. So now, in terms of the questions and answers, just like to ask anyone who has a question to raise their hand. Then yes, okay, I have one hand raised. So then when you ask your question, if you could also turn on your video and introduce yourself, that would be nice. So I have one question in the chat box, I believe. Yes, and one hand. Okay, so Shalini Bhutani, would you be able to?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for this. Congratulations, Dr. Pooja Prasad, for your work. Very important. I just had a question regarding Participatory Irrigation Management Act that Maharashtra has. There is, a 20-year-old legislation, which is the Maharashtra Management of Irrigation Systems by Farmers Act, and there are water user groups in that. How have they responded to this? Do they have a say in the shift that is taking place under PoCRA? My second point is with regard to drip irrigation. Quite recently, there is a global movement to try and reduce plastics in the use of agriculture. And the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has put out voluntary guidelines for guidance to transition out of plastics to reduce the plastic problem within agriculture. And drip irrigation is one of the major issues where lots of pipes and equipment is used which is not biodegradable. So in trying to make communities climate resilient, whether that is exacerbating the plastic problem. And of course, my final point, because most of my work has been around seed law and policy, is how our traditional varieties of seeds which are climate resilient in those areas, and there are local groups there doing seed saving, how are they plugged in or galvanized in these issues? Thank you so much.
Thank you for those questions. Let me try to see if I can do justice. So your first question was around participatory irrigation management, which is really more in the context of canal irrigation. And where water users association are meant to take ownership of how water is distributed in the distributaries and so on. This PoCRA's area where PoCRA focused was not under canal irrigation. So this is all primarily rain-fed area where groundwater is privately sort of accessed, and so there isn't, so the PIM actually doesn't apply there. There is no water user association. In case of groundwater, Aquadam and others have been trying to promote participatory groundwater management, and however, that has not been, that was not part of this effort. It hasn't been happening in this area. On your question around drip, I completely agree that this the use of plastic in drip irrigation is very concerning. And in fact, what we find and I earlier had a picture showing how drip lines, many of them, the cheaper ones, which get degraded in terms, because of extended exposure to sunlight, or only degraded, not in terms of biodegraded, but not usable for irrigation, how they are, just sort of lying there, or farmers are repurposing them for different uses. But whether this can become a rallying point for a shift to more sustainable practices, I'm not sure about that. I think the narrative around efficiency, the short-term gains, is so high that unless it's really through some regulation, I'm not too optimistic about whether farmers on their own can be encouraged to sort of move away from drip irrigation. There are other reasons why farmers don't prefer drip irrigation in other parts of the country, but this has not really come about so much. And your final question around traditional varieties so I think again, this is it was not the focus of PoCRA, right? The focus on market linkages, focus on creating FPCs and so on. It has really been more on high value crops and more horticulture crops and so on. While I think it is really the CSOs and NGOs who are really trying to work more on the traditional crop varieties. But it is not, I haven't seen that as a focus in PoCRA. I hope that.
Okay. Wonderful. So next we have a question from PS Vijay Shankar, and then one from Sikandar Siraj. If you could unmute yourself.
Hello, hi, Pooja. Viju here. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you.
Audible?
Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I have 2 or 3 questions. One is a bit, one should say, technical kind of question. What's the kind of water balance model that you are using? Like you are talking about crop water requirement, CWB. How have you done this crop water requirement estimation? And secondly, when you talk about the water, you're talking about newly harvested water. But available water will also include the natural recharge and other kinds of water. One can broadly call it old water. So how do you estimate old and new water in that water balance kind of model? That is my first question, especially the crop water requirement, because there's so much discussion on that. And orchards are not single crop, there are multiple crops. So how do you do the estimation kind of thing, which is more like a technical kind of question? And second is this, your basic proposition is that new water, whatever the PoCRA is trying to do, that will never meet the demand because orchards are very much locked into irrigation. So, which means that, I mean, to reverse your question, given that there are orchards, 42 acres, whatever hectares, whatever, what will be the kind of water harvesting required to meet their demand? It will definitely be much beyond the capacity of a dry drought-prone area like Jalna, which gets around 700 millimeter rainfall. But I'm saying that even if you harvest as much as you can, even then the water will not be sufficient to meet the demand of the orchards, which are very highly water requiring. Which basically means that this system or PoCRA is not designed for rainfed agriculture. It's designed for basically to meet the need of orchards. So then the second question my end will be, what is the kind of political economy which is sustaining these orchards? I think that is the question, I think, which you can, I'm sure you would have looked at it. I think which probably you can probably bring into the discussion, how the orchards are supported, even though they are high risk and highly locked into irrigation and so on, what sustains them? And third is this interesting model that you talked about, this farm pond plus drip irrigation plus orchards. Is becoming a new, one should say, Maharashtra model, which is being emulated widely in Madhya Pradesh. So I think a broad comment on that also, the sustainability of that. It's not only in PoCRA. I see it even other kind of harvesting or water management programs, even in places like Madhya Pradesh. They have these elevated ponds with plastic lining, supported by drip irrigation, and all going into high value crops. So that's becoming a new model in water use or water management or something, which is completely contrary to the principles of local water management or watershed or something. So some kind of a larger political comment on what how this is shaping up in policy. I think that also could be interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. A very interesting question. So first on the water balance, the water budget tool is the one that that IIT Bombay team developed for PoCRA, and they've been using it for. So it is a spatially resolved model. So what one uses the satellite images to get soil depth, so soil depth, the soil type, whether it's clay, sandy, or so on, the slope. So all of those layers are available, and then it is basically done as micro watershed levels. So for example, PoCRA is divided into 7 micro watersheds, and there is we started with an hour, so it's an hourly rainfall pattern. So for that particular monsoon, with an hourly rainfall pattern, you do a soil water balance. So essentially each pixel is taken and there is a soil water balance done there. And then because you specifically asked about the crop water requirement. So from the ground, we need 2 things for that water budget. One is what is the cropping pattern per zone, and what is the existing water storage in each zone. And then we basically use the FAO crop water, actually FAO and also some of the KVKs have these potential evapotranspiration of the crop. And with the soil water balance, you can see what is the AET, the actual evapotranspiration that happens. So we do that during the monsoon season, and the deficit in terms of what was the crop water potential, what was the requirement, and what the crop is actually able to get from the soil moisture. The difference between that is what is the irrigation requirement and for that crop, and that is how it is computed. And there is, I mean, I can also point to a paper that goes into the details on how that is done. Your second question was around the orchards, right? And what kind of, so you're right. I mean, the question isn't even how much water would you need to be harvested to meet the crop water requirement, because this is a dynamic process. Right? If you now go 5 years from now, I'm sure if today I were to visit Paradgaon, there is going to be far more orchards than they started with. And so as soon as you make the water available, the investment in orchard is going to go up. So it is this dynamic process, and you're going to come back to square one. So resilience means also talking about the demand. It's not just talking about how much more water can we harvest. And that is where that is where institutions matter. And we move away from a systems approach, a more of a watershed or a landscape approach, to this approach where we look at some progressive farmers, and we look at how their farm incomes have increased, how productivity has increased. That has really created this sort of amnesia where you're not thinking about 90% of your farmers or 85% of your farmers, and you're still able to show that your climate resilience has gone up, your water productivity has gone up, because your focus is now the farm, and it is only these farms which are your beneficiaries. So that is really a problem there, and it's also sort of the aspirations. If you look at the farmers and you speak to them, it is every farmer's aspiration. That is development. That is good life, to have orchards where you're not going every day to irrigate. You have drip lines. You have so it's also that imagination of what it means to progress when it comes to farming. Right. So the kind of advertisements and posters you see in village, they are all talking about farm ponds and horticulture and so on. And
the rainfed is not there in the imagination at all in the model. Yeah, rainfed is not there at all in the imagination. The whole imagination of PoCRA. Yeah. The rainfed farmers are not even counted. You're basically orchard focus kind of program.
Exactly. Yeah. Even though the motivation draws from the rainfed farmers. Yes. And yes, again, what you said, what you've seen in, you're talking about MP, I've also seen it in Rajasthan, where farm ponds, as you said, elevated farm ponds, which are in fact filled by groundwater, not even rainwater harvesting structures. These are filled through deep bore wells. a lot, maybe 1/3 or half of that water will evaporate. But because the value of water, of the produce that it will produce is so high, and I really think it requires some research to look into the kind of, market prices that these orchards produce have, and what would happen if you were to internalize these costs of evaporated groundwater and the plastics in drip irrigation and a lot of those. I think I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so next I think we have Sikandar Siraj.
Hi Pooja, thank you so much for the talk. It was really interesting, and when you were talking about orchards, I think one of the things that came up is it's surprising that something like PoCRA is propagating another kind of monocropping in the name of climate resilient. Orchards is just another way of monocropping, essentially. But what my question, the question I had was, there is one part that trees do play, which is reduction of soil erosion with erratic rainfall, particularly in areas with gradients, right? So there is a role for agroforestry in building resilience. Orchard may not be the right solution for it. And your model, while it talks a lot about water specifically, I think there are other aspects of the resilience puzzle which need to be factored in and where trees do play a role. So how do we, kind of balance that thing as well? Now, if you're going to get 100, 150 mm rainfalls in a night, then you need some kind of erosion prevention mechanism to be in place in the form of trees, right? Away from field. And the other thing is this whole carbon market driven, almost very dramatic expansion that's happening with very good intention, like Farmers for Forests are doing this work in terms of plantation and whatnot. How do you think what you are talking about can be more deeply ingrained into the way they are actually executing on the ground?
Thanks, Siraj. So, in terms of agroforestry, right, I think it depends on what kind of trees one is planting, right? I don't know a whole lot about agroforestry, so I don't want to say much, but I have, in my interaction with organizations such as FES in Rajasthan, where they have been repeatedly saying that indigenous varieties of trees versus, what goes as agroforestry, that is something one has to be careful about. And you're right that the lens that I use is to look at water, but that is a necessary lens, right? There may be further constraints due to the market, due to, other extreme events and so on, which will further constrain our solution space. But water is a big one, especially in these semi-arid regions. And so one has to look at the water budget for the overall landscape and look at it for drought year, right? What happens in drought year and so at extreme rainfall years? How is it going to do? And with this clear objective of what are we building resilience against, like resilient to what, right? And so if it is resilient to droughts, to dry spells, then let's look at a water budget for that year and kind of see what role would these tree varieties play in. So I don't have a yes or no answer because I haven't really studied it, but that would be my response. Again, for the carbon market, I don't have a very precise answer except for saying that, if it becomes some, finally one has to look at the ground level practices and what kind of practices is it promoting and are they sustainable? And if the carbon trade becomes something that incentivizes practices that are sustainable, that allow people, that allows collective action, then that's great. But if it becomes a way to sort of greenwash things, then that's a problem. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So Ankit Kumar.
Hi, ma'am. I just posted my in chat box. It was like I'm able to articulate while writing. So please refer that.
Okay, I can read it out. You're saying how do cultivation crop selection patterns look among the farmers? Whether it's based on water availability or farmers choose the crop that requires less water. It's quite mixed up sometimes. Also, in some cases, farmers are particular about the crop based on the productivity or market value. Where did it go? And they grow and prioritize the water for that crop first, and the rest might get affected. It's about how yeah. Yeah, so
The
yeah, do you
context
wanted to go ahead.
to add. So while my last field work in MP, the farmers like in this after April to June, there was very less water. So they prioritize a specific crop. Let's say if they are growing this wheat or this dollar chana, that's Kabuli chana, or any specific crop. So they save water for that crop only because they are mostly irrigating from the well. So how the farmers select how they select the crops in that area, whether it is like based on the availability of water, or is it the crops which are consuming less water? In case of MP, they prioritize the crop, not the crop which are consuming less water, and they save water for that crop only. Rest other crop might get affected. So what's the pattern I'm trying to understand?
Yeah, so I think that would be very context specific. For the case, for my study area, what I have found is that farmers try to, so when they are planting the Kharif crop, it is going blind. They don't know what kind of monsoon they are going to have. So, right, so they can't really make a very informed choice on, but when it comes to the Rabi cropping, monsoon has already ended, and they can then have a good estimate of, based on their prior experience, how long will their well hold. If it's a groundwater based irrigation, they will typically estimate that, oh, I'll be able to give 4 or 5 irrigations, let me grow wheat this year. Or sometimes they may feel that, oh, this has been a bad rainfall year, I need to maybe just save grow fodder, or maybe not have a Rabi crop at all. The problem is that this is done at an individual level. And since groundwater is a common pool resource, unless there's collective action and people speak to each other, and like what has been done in many villages where there's a Gram Sabha held and there's a discussion held on, how do we foresee the Rabi season or the summer season, and should we allow water intensive crops? This happens in some villages like Hivre Bazar and others, but in where it doesn't, it is an individual decision. And you're right, markets influence it. NGO partners or farmer producer companies, if they are formed, many of these also influence it.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
But it would be great to know more about this. So if you're, in your study area, if you could also write about this, it would be really nice to know more about how farmers make decisions.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. So then we have Sayed Shoaib Ali.
Hi, very insightful paper. I'll look forward to read the whole text. But I seek one clarification, and I have a question. So for clarification, you presented one of the first figures you had was for Indian districts, the RI. I do not know how RI is calculated, but I was surprised as to why the dry and arid trans-Himalayan districts were actually blue, dark blue, as having very high RI. So I do not really know. So that would be great to know. In terms of questions, so I have for long worked in parts of Western Himalaya where orchards are mostly rainfed. But increasingly, the political articulation of irrigation comes from gendered shifts in labor and aspirations as well, where there is increasing scarcity of farmyard manure. Increasing scarcity of farmyard manure means that soils struggle to retain moisture. and the soil moisture sort of is integral to the management of orchards. So I would love to know actually a bit more about when you talk about orchards, and this political demand for articulation. How much do soil practices figure in, and what does this management look like at the spectrum of where it's mostly family labor or where it's large farms that sort of um, rely on largely on hired labor. Would be very insightful. I've never worked in that part of the country, so it would really be insightful to know.
Pooja, if I just
Yes,
may
sir.
add one, Pooja, just Viju here, Vijay Shankar here.
Yeah.
One small comment, if you may add, the third element in PoCRA you mentioned is soil health. I think his question related to that. So how does soil figure at all in this model? I don't see any way it is figuring the way you have put it,
No.
neither in the farm pond, nor in drip irrigation, nor in orchard. Where soil health and soil management, the soil health cards, the entire idea about soil, does that come in? That I think probably the slide
Yeah.
is asking, which is very interesting. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'll just take the third comment first and then come back to you. You're right that if you look at the soil component there, it talks about good agricultural practices, and it talks about some nutrient management and so on, but it's really, I mean, if you look at the whole document in terms of the how it is envisioned and the concept note to then the actual operationalization of what activities get funded and then how much money gets allocated, it really starts to unravel in terms of what's really happening. Because again, it's not really soil carbon that anybody is looking at or soil organic matter. It's carbon sequestered, which is through this FAO model that they compute. It's right. So, but a very insightful question also, said Shravan. It'll be nice. I mean, I have only visited that part of the country and I've looked at apple orchards and other orchards, and it would be really nice to kind of understand how, you know, how this applies or these kind of questions apply in that context. But okay, so to your first question on the map, that map, the source of that map is the Rainfed Atlas by RRA Network. So the paper has a link to it. You can take a look at it. Essentially, what they've done is said anything that has any district which has less than 40% area irrigated has been shown as a rain-fed district. So if there is more irrigation than 40% in that district, then perhaps that's the reason why it's shown as blue. If you think there's a problem there, I think we should look at it and discuss it and also maybe involve Vasan in that. Yeah, so in terms of soil management, really, as I said, there's in fact what I've seen in Maharashtra, especially in Nashik and other areas, which is really sort of the mother of, you know, that's where if you go to many of these areas, even in MP and Rajasthan, they'll say, oh, somebody from my family went to Maharashtra to Nashik, and that's where we learned this. We got the saplings from there and so on. And there, the practice is that there are what they call doctors, consultants who are hired by the farmers, and especially if it is meant for export, for grapes and for other factors, that they are the ones who will take a look. They will tell you which chemicals to apply, and it's highly chemical intensive. And especially if it's for export, you know, how to manage that part. So yeah, so I mean, it's not really soil management in the sense that you're probably thinking of. But it'll be interesting to learn more about your study area.
Thank you. So I think we have one last question. I think Nikit is probably going to ask Ruchira Goyal's question. She had to go, but it'll be recorded at least. Go ahead, Nikit.
Thanks so much, Pooja. This was amazing, very interesting, very, very interesting. I have a couple of questions. One question that I was wondering, so you make a very interesting argument, and please correct me if I understand wrong, that their idea of resilience gets sort of solidified, or their promise of resilience gets solidified by the virtue of them being able to generate carbon credits, or basically do some kind of carbon accounting with respect to the sequestration. But the carbon accounting really needs to be measured in terms of what is that incremental change from what was earlier. And in your paper, in your talk, you also mentioned that there is this watershed approach earlier being implemented, and now it has moved to this technocratic approach. So how is that change uh, being measured to generate or account for carbon in their imagination, in the project's imagination of the world? And how does that differ from what you are talking about in terms of carbon sequestration from watershed to this technocratic approach? And just on the second question about bouncing off on Ruchira's question, both of us, I mean, Ruchira and I, are wondering about the effects of this kind of a research project on two things. One, on the life of the project itself, but I understand as an ethnographer, anthropologist, it would be too much to give ourselves that kind of importance. But what about the access to do subsequent research on the same project? Do you feel that there will be pushback? And how did you negotiate the access in the first place?
Yeah, so maybe the second question first. So as I said that when PoCRA was being implemented in 2017, I was a PhD scholar at Sitara in IIT Bombay. And so we became insiders because the PoCRA management unit, the main bureaucrat who was responsible for it, they approached IIT Bombay to develop the water budget tool for them. And my thesis advisor and a team of students, we all worked to develop that water budget tool. It was an immense learning experience for us technically, and also in terms of access to the PoCRA villages. So for example, the DPR, I searched for it online later to see if, is it publicly available? And I couldn't find it. These were documents that were accessible to us at that time, because we were trying to see, do these kind of analysis of what the water budget shows in terms of its potential impact. That said, PoCRA actually has a lot of, it has an MIS, a dashboard, and what eventually happened, who were the beneficiaries, and a lot of that information is online. I would definitely be interested in going back and working in these areas. I think now is actually a good time to do this. PoCRA has overall been considered as a phenomenal success. It has, there's a different thread, and maybe a thread that you would be interested in because you are looking into digital agriculture, because a big USP of PoCRA was the digital systems and the kind of dashboards it built and the kind of quote unquote transparency it brought in terms of what's happening where. And PoCRA did a roadshow. It invited bureaucrats from the center, and a second phase was approved and has now kicked off on how it could be expanded to the rest of the state. And similar versions of PoCRA are now also being done in different states with World Bank funding. So yes, I'm not sure this research has had much of a dent in that respect, because I have tried to gain access to the Secretary of Water, Department of Water Resources, and we've had these discussions. But I think what we also need to do is, because they always say, okay, give me a solution, right? And that is where we have a lot of civil society working on these solutions. And I think we need more researchers and more research also on how these other alternative ways of doing things are working. And we really need to go to them, not just with, hey, this is a problem, but also these are alternative models and how could they be incorporated? And I think they're willing to hear us out there. your other really sort of thoughtful question on the carbon market, I think it's something that most people don't relate to, right? Carbon sequestered. Okay, unless it's broken down for a farmer, for communities, what does resilience mean, and what does having sequestered more carbon mean locally to the communities there? It doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't. And so in some ways the loop doesn't close when we are talking about what is resilience, and the fact that the PoCRA documentation doesn't really say what is, it doesn't really define resilience, right? If you have been able to sequester more carbon, now the thing is, since PoCRA, we haven't had, fortunately, bad rainfall year. This year is expected to be a bad rainfall year, and it would be a good idea to actually go and see what happens in these villages. And that would be the real sort of test of how has resilience really materialized, and not in terms of the carbon, really. And not just, I think we also have, for most interventions, most projects, we only measure impact for the beneficiaries, but taking a system view and seeing who lost out, because finally there's only so much water. It's a zero-sum game. When you concentrate it in the hands of a few, you have to look at what happens to others, because they have lost out, and that has to be accounted for. So.
Just to go back to the access question, will you be allowed to research the same project again after this paper?
Allowed by?
I mean, will you have access to the bureaucrats, and did you have access to bureaucrats while doing this project, and will you have it again?
So I think I would have access to the bureaucrats in terms of just having their ear. The bureaucrats have changed now. I don't know the current current officer who's in charge, but I don't know if I'll have, of course, if I will have access to the project documents. But in some ways it doesn't matter, because for the villages that have already had this, we can now go and see what has been implemented, and yeah, and we can proceed from there.
Is PoCRA an ongoing program, or is it closed now?
Yeah. So phase 1 is closed, but phase 2 has been approved. So
okay.
Yeah. And we are yet to see what that will look like.
Yeah. But is there any design change in the between phase 1 and 2?
That's what one. Yeah, that is something we need to see. I'm not sure whether they are, which regions are they focusing on, and what aspects of they. Yeah, that is something that I need to look into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think we're reaching the end of our time, but I think this discussion has sort of led us to, it kind of underscores the need to examine the conception of resilience. What is meant by resilience? Maybe what does resilience mean for farmers? Like how do they understand resilience? And then in the larger discourse, how is resilience being sort of understood, or maybe taken in certain directions because of other imperatives. So that's maybe something that could connect to some of our future speakers' topics as well. I'm sure there's also many other threads from this that will link to other topics that will be taken up later in the series. So thank you so much to Dr. Prasad and all of the friends who participated and asked such interesting questions. It's really a very important topic that's been taken up. You can see that there's a lot of scope for further research as well. So I would just like to say the next session will be in the last week of May. We'll be announcing that via the listserv. And so stay tuned for that. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything else before we close. Nikit or Devoti? Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to the NRAS team.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you to the organizers. Okay. Stop recording.